Good, I now have the full transcript. I'll write a completely new, original story using the same formula. Before I start, let me subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. She walked into my home carrying a $3,400 handbag and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Within 20 minutes of sitting down to dinner, she had slid a single sheet of paper across my dining room table, a preliminary financial plan for the wedding, and smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. The number at the bottom was $1.8 million. My son sat across from me, rigid as a fence post, his fork untouched beside his plate. He hadn't looked at me once since she pulled out that paper. But when she turned to refill her wine glass, he did something I hadn't seen him do since he was 12 years old, and had gotten himself into serious trouble at school. He looked at me just for a second, with pure, quiet desperation. I'm Walter Briggs. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 31 years as a senior investigator for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the unit that does not audit you, the unit that arrests you. I have personally built cases against hedge fund managers, restaurant chains, televangelists, and a sitting city councilman who thought he could bury $900,000 inside a nonprofit dog shelter. I know fraud. I know it by how a person holds their pen when they sign something they're not sure about. I know it by what they don't say. I know it by the silence between the sentences. That silence was everywhere at my dinner table that night. My son's name is Daniel. He's 32, an aerospace engineer. Quiet and methodical in the way that engineers often are, careful, deliberate, trusting of data over instinct. He'd been seeing a woman named Renata for 7 months. I had met her twice before this dinner, both times briefly, at gatherings where she was charming and light, and said exactly the right things. His mother, God rest her soul, would have seen through it immediately. Claire always had a gift for reading people that I spent years trying to develop through training. She just had it naturally. Claire had been gone for 6 years. I'd learned to trust my training instead. Renata's mother, a woman named Sylvia, who introduced herself as a lifestyle consultant, sat to my right and spent the first 20 minutes complimenting every piece of furniture in my dining room in the specific way people do when they are calculating what things cost. She touched the edge of my credenza. She asked where I'd gotten my dining chairs. She looked at the painting above the fireplace and tilted her head and said, "That's original, isn't it?" It was. I had bought it at an estate auction 14 years ago. It was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000. I had not told anyone that except Claire and my financial advisor. Something cold moved through me. Over the first course, I had made my mother's pot roast because Daniel had always loved it. Renata began talking about the wedding. She talked the way a person who has practiced a speech talks, hitting each note in sequence without quite listening to the responses. The venue she had fallen in love with, the catering company that only does 20 events a year, so we'd need to commit quickly. The photographer flown in from Italy who apparently charged $80,000 for a single weekend. Daniel rearranged his food. Sylvia nodded at each item like a co-presenter. Then Renata produced the paper. She had printed it on heavy cream stock, the kind you use for formal invitations. The line items were precise and neatly organized. Venue deposit, $180,000. Catering per head, 250 guests, $340 per person. Photography and videography, $82,000. Floral installations, $95,000. Dress and accessories, TBD, but estimated between $60,000 and $80,000. On and on. 32 line items totaling $1,847,000. She slid it across the table to me specifically, not to Daniel and me together. To me, "We wanted you to have a chance to look it over," she said. "Daniel is so close to you. We know this kind of thing matters to you, being part of his big day." It was elegantly done. The framing of the ask as inclusion, as an honor. I looked at the paper for a long moment. Then I looked at Daniel. His jaw was tight enough to crack. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw 3 things: shame, fear, and a plea so clear it didn't need words. Sylvia filled the silence. Of course, traditional families always see the importance of starting a marriage with celebration. It says something about how much you value Daniel's happiness. There it was, the frame. "Pay this money or you are saying your son's happiness doesn't matter to you." I set the paper down gently beside my plate. "This is a significant document," I said. "We think so," Renata agreed. "I'd like to understand it better. Are these numbers from signed vendor contracts, or are they estimates? Something shifted in Renata's posture. Barely perceptible, like a single degree of temperature change in a room. We're in the early planning phase, she said, but these numbers are from conversations with our planner. She's been very specific. I see. And who is your planner? Her name is Cassandra Vale. She's boutique, very exclusive, mostly referral-based. I'd love her contact information. Renata smiled. Of course. I'll get that to you. She wouldn't. I reached for the breadbasket and let the conversation move to other things. I listened while Renata talked about the venue, a property she described as a historic estate outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with views of the Blue Ridge Mountains and a capacity for 300 guests. Sylvia talked about how Renata had always dreamed of that setting. Daniel said almost nothing. After dinner, I offered after-dinner drinks in the sitting room. Renata and Sylvia accepted. Daniel said he would help me in the kitchen. We stood at the sink, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I ran water over the dishes. He picked up a dish towel. Tell me, I said quietly. He kept his eyes on the towel. She's not who I thought she was. How long have you known? 3 months. Maybe more. I kept making excuses. His voice was low, ashamed. She borrowed $22,000 from me in the first 4 months. Emergency repairs on a rental property her mother owns. Then a medical bill her insurance denied. Then he stopped. Swallowed. She asked me to wire money to a vendor account for the wedding deposit. A venue I've never seen. Dad, I looked it up. The address is a strip mall in Tennessee. I turned off the water. Does she know you know? No. I didn't want to confront her alone. I didn't. He set the towel down. I didn't know what she'd do. I looked at my son. He was 32 years old, 6 feet tall, had 2 patents in his name, and a graduate degree from Georgia Tech. And right now, he looked exactly like the 12-year-old boy who had come to me after he'd broken something he couldn't fix on his own. I'll handle it, I said. You say nothing, give nothing, agree to nothing tonight. Can you do that? He nodded. Good. Go back in there and let her think this dinner went perfectly. He did. I watched him walk back into the sitting room and listened to Renata explain the wedding's aesthetic vision. He nodded in the right places. He asked a reasonable question about the timeline. He was a better actor than she deserved. I spent 2 hours being pleasant company. I poured drinks. I listened to Sylvia describe a villa she had stayed in on Lake Como. I told a courteous story from my early career. I walked them to the door at 9:30 and told them what a lovely evening it had been. When the car was gone, I went to my study and began making calls. I still had friends from my years at SID. Not all of them had retired. Some had moved into private forensic accounting, financial investigations, corporate due diligence. I left 2 voicemails and sent 3 text messages. Then I opened my laptop and started with what I could do myself. The Cassandra Vale, who supposedly ran an exclusive wedding planning firm, left no footprint, no business registration, no website, no social media, no licensing in North Carolina, where weddings require no specific licensure, but where a genuine business of any kind would still have a traceable presence. Nothing. The venue Renata had named the Harlow Estate in Asheville did exist, but its events calendar was booked through the following year, and its deposit requirement was $25,000, not $180,000. The vendor wire account Daniel had been given for the deposit routed to a business entity called Vantage Event Services, LLC, registered in Delaware, with a registered agent address shared by 47 other companies. The principal was listed as a name I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. By midnight, I had the outline of a pattern. By 2 a.m, I had confirmation of a previous victim. His name was found through a forum thread buried 3 pages into a search for one of the company names in the wire account chain. A man named George Haskins had posted 18 months earlier, asking if anyone had encountered a wedding planning scam involving fake vendors and wired deposits. He'd lost $28,000. No one had responded. I sent him a message. He wrote back within 6 hours. He answered my subsequent phone call on the second ring, and he talked for 40 minutes. George Haskins was a 58-year-old dentist from Charlotte, North Carolina. His son Marcus had been engaged to a woman named Andrea. Andrea's mother had been heavily involved in the wedding planning. The vendor list had included several companies that didn't exist. The deposits had gone to accounts that couldn't be traced. The engagement had ended when Marcus discovered Andrea had been simultaneously involved with another man, and the whole wedding apparatus had apparently been designed to extract as much money as possible before it collapsed. Andrea's description matched Renata closely. Different name, different hair color, different city, the same unhurried confidence. the same mother at her side. I asked George to email me every document he'd saved. He sent them within the hour. Bank transfer records, vendor correspondence, a copy of the planning document his son had been given. I laid it next to the document Renata had given me. Same font, same layout, different numbers, same structure. The next morning I called my former colleague Patricia Hendricks, who now ran a financial investigations firm in Atlanta. I had testified at 3 trials where her forensic analysis had been central to the prosecution. She was meticulous in the way that people who have spent 30 years tracking money tend to be relentless and quiet about it. I told her what I had. Send me everything, she said. Give me 4 days. I gave Daniel specific instructions. Be warm with Renata. Be vague about timelines. If she asked about the wedding budget, say that his father was reviewing the document carefully and that he appreciated her patience. Don't transfer any money. Don't sign anything. Don't let on that anything had changed. She keeps texting, he said, saying she needs an answer on the venue by the end of the month. There's no venue, I said. Tell her you understand and you're working on it. What if she breaks it off? Then you'll know exactly what this was worth to her. He was quiet. Then, yeah, okay. Patricia called me on day 3. Walter, these 2 women have been running variations of this for at least 6 years. I've found documentation connecting them to 4 incidents in 3 states. The mother operates the financial side. She sets up the shell entities. The daughter manages the targets. They run the same play every time. Long enough courtship to establish trust, engagement, a large budget wedding plan presented to the groom's family, pressure to commit funds quickly, and then the money disappears into the entity chain before the vendors are ever contacted. How much total? What I can document. Just over $310,000 across 4 victims, but this is what they left footprints on. There may be more. Can you build a case file? I'm already building it. I'm also going to recommend you talk to the FBI field office in Charlotte. This crosses state lines. It's federal jurisdiction. Wire fraud, potentially organized criminal activity given the pattern. How soon can you have the documentation ready? End of the week. Walter, these women are good. They've avoided prosecution because each individual victim faced the same problem, he said. She said, no contract, hard to prove intent. But with the pattern evidence, it changes entirely. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Renata began to apply pressure in the way people do when they sense a window closing. The texts became more frequent, more emotionally layered. She missed Daniel. She had dreamed of this her whole life. She hoped his father understood what this meant to her. Did Daniel know how much she loved him? Wasn't family supposed to support this kind of happiness? Sylvia called Daniel directly and said that she didn't want to interfere, but she was simply worried that outside voices were affecting his perspective on what should be a joyful time. Outside voices. That was me. I didn't say anything to Daniel about how transparent this was. He was starting to see it himself. On Thursday, Renata sent him a new message. She had scheduled a meeting with the wedding planner for Saturday afternoon and wanted both Daniel and me to come. This was the next step, she said. It was important for everyone to be on the same page. She sent an address in downtown Greenville, South Carolina. The office of Cassandra Vale, Wedding Design and Events. I searched the address. It was a shared office building that rented space by the day or week for meetings and presentations. Anyone could book a conference room there for $95 an hour. I called Patricia and told her. They're setting up a staged meeting, she said. Probably someone acting as the planner. It's designed to make the operation look legitimate enough to get you to commit. I know. I'm going. You're sure? I spent 31 years working up to moments like this one. Saturday morning, I put on the suit I used to wear to federal courthouse appearances, navy blue, no tie, plain white shirt. I told Daniel to dress normally. I told him to let me lead the conversation. I told him to trust me. I trust you, he said. We drove to Greenville together. The building was glass and steel, exactly the kind of place that looks impressive on a Saturday when most businesses are closed. The lobby directory listed the conference room suites. One was reserved under Vail events. Renata and Sylvia were waiting in the hallway outside. Renata wore a cream blazer. Sylvia had a leather portfolio under her arm. The woman playing the wedding planner introduced herself as Cassandra. She was perhaps 45, professional, warm, prepared. She had binders. She had printed boards of aesthetic concepts. She had a genuine presence and a practiced manner. I let the meeting run for 11 minutes. Then I opened my own folder. Before we go further, I said, I'd like to clarify a few things about the vendor list from the document you sent us 2 weeks ago. Renata's eyes moved to my folder. The first vendor listed is Soleil Floral Installations, I said. The address on your document is 4420 Meridian Court in Asheville. That address is a private residence. There is no business registered there. There is no business named Soleil Floral Installations registered anywhere in North Carolina. Silence. The second vendor, Altitude Catering Group, lists a contact email and phone number. The phone number goes to a Google Voice account that was created 4 months ago. The email domain was registered the same month. Cassandra, whoever she actually was very still. The deposit wire account you gave my son routes through Vantage Event Services, LLC, registered in Delaware. The registered agent for Vantage Event Services shares an address with 2 other LLCs connected to transactions in a fraud complaint filed in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, 18 months ago. The complainant's name is George Haskins. Renata's face had gone white. I've spoken with Mr. Haskins, I continued, at length. I also have documentation from 4 other incidents that follow this same pattern. Different names, different cities, same financial structure. The total documented losses from those incidents are $310,000. I set the folder down on the table. Patricia Hendricks, a forensic accountant I retained for this matter, has prepared a case file that I have already shared with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Charlotte. An agent there has confirmed they are opening an inquiry. Sylvia pushed back her chair. This meeting is over, she said. The meeting is over, I agreed. But I want to be clear about what happens next. If you disengage completely from my son, from this engagement, from any contact, I will let the federal inquiry proceed without my active participation. I won't be the one calling them every week. I won't be lobbying for faster action. I paused. If you do not disengage, if there is any further communication, any further request for money, any attempt to reframe this situation, I will spend every hour I have making sure this case moves as quickly as possible. I know how federal financial crimes investigations work. I spent 3 decades working them. I know what accelerates them and what bogs them down. I can make a significant difference in how fast this moves. The room was very quiet. Renata was looking at her mother. Her composure was almost holding, but not quite. Her chin was trembling slightly. It was the first genuinely uncontrolled thing I had seen her do. You have no idea what you're talking about, Sylvia said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I've been doing this since before your daughter was born, I said. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Daniel hadn't said a word. He was watching Renata with an expression I recognized, not anger, not hurt, not betrayal exactly, just the specific grief of finally seeing something clearly that you had been working very hard not to see. Cassandra gathered her binders and left without a word. Sylvia touched Renata's arm. They left without looking back. I sat for a moment in the quiet conference room. Daniel exhaled slowly. Was any of it real, he asked. The first months, when she seemed, probably not, I said. The ones who do this well make the early part feel real. That's the product they're selling. She seemed to actually... He stopped. I know. How did you know for sure? When did you know it wasn't just someone who wanted an expensive wedding? When she slid that paper across the table to me instead of to you. A woman planning a real wedding with the man she loves doesn't present a budget to his father like a business proposal. She might ask for help, she might hope for support, but she doesn't come in with printed line items and a number at the bottom. I stood. You knew before I did. You wrote me the note at dinner. He hadn't written a note. He had looked at me, but he understood what I meant. We drove back to Charlotte mostly in silence. An hour outside of Greenville, Daniel said, What happens now with the FBI thing? The inquiry is real. Patricia's case file is real. Whether it results in charges depends on how the agents assess the evidence and whether they can find additional victims willing to participate. George Haskins has already said he'll cooperate. Will she go to prison? I don't know. Possibly. These cases are complicated, and intent is difficult to prove in isolation. The pattern evidence helps significantly, but they'd need a prosecutor willing to invest in it. Do you think they will? I said carefully, that when an experienced federal investigator hands you a pre-built case file with documented victims, financial forensics, and an established pattern of criminal activity, you don't leave it in a drawer. 3 weeks later, Patricia called to tell me the FBI had officially opened a formal investigation. 2 weeks after that, George Haskins called to tell me that agents had contacted him for a full interview. Daniel told me he had deleted Renata's number. She had not contacted him again. I don't know how the federal case will ultimately resolve. These things take time, and the legal system is not a machine you can predict. What I know is that the documentation is solid, the victims are willing to speak, and the pattern is unmistakable. What I know is that my son is not in federal prison, which is where people who wire $1.8 million to a chain of shell companies sometimes find themselves when they can't explain the transactions. What I know is that when Renata slid that paper across my table, she was counting on me to see a proud father who wanted his son to be happy and who could be made to feel that his money was the expression of that love. She didn't know she was sliding it to someone who had spent 3 decades learning to read exactly what that paper was. I'm retired. I restore antique maps in my spare time. I have a standing Tuesday lunch with 2 former colleagues and a garden that needs more attention than I give it. I am not a prosecutor. I am not an investigator. I am not looking for cases to build or wrongs to correct. But when someone sits down at my dinner table, looks at my son, and starts running numbers in their head, instead of listening to what he says when someone treats my child like a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be loved, something in me that 31 years of training put there comes back online. Quiet, methodical, patient. It does not make mistakes. And it does not stop until the work is done. If you're watching this, and you have a son or daughter in a relationship that doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. Ask where the money is going. Ask to see the contracts. Ask to meet the vendors. The people who run schemes like this count on good manners and family loyalty to keep you from asking. Ask anyway. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share what time it is in your region in the comments. The next story is just 1 click away. Thank you for watching.